Hi, Taylor T. Carlson, and I'm back with another video for you. Continuing our coverage of Marvel's Star Wars comics today, we're going to do a series review for Darth Vader Volume 2, which was subtitled Dark Lord of the Sith. This is the second of the three Darth Vader comics that Marvel has had going, this one written by Charles Soule. There was an earlier comic written by Kieran Gillen primarily that ran from 2015 to 2016 for 29 issues, including crossovers. This comic runs for 25 issues plus one annual, and this one is set between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Generally, it takes place in the years immediately following Revenge of the Sith, with Vader coming to terms with his new role following the fall of the Jedi Order and the death of his wife, Padme Amidala. This story has been split into 4 trade paperbacks, so I'm going to show these off and I'm going to go through each arc of the comic and just talk about the general overall storyline, my opinions and review, and so forth. There will be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't read these comics and you don't want them spoiled, don't watch this until after you've read them. I'm not going to cover each and every plot point here, but I am going to be pretty thorough with some integral plot details, so again, spoilers ahead. The first arc is called Imperial Machine, and this is where things start. This trade paperback has I believe the first 6 issues of the comic. I think these are all split into 6 issues apiece, with the exception of the third one, which has 6 plus the annual, and then the final volume has 6 issues for a grand total of 25 plus the one annual, so that's 26 comics, I believe. In the Imperial Machine arc, at this point, Darth Vader has risen from the operating table, now relegated to the black mask and life support armor that keep him alive. He screams out in anguish at the loss of Padme, and his burst of anger even floors Palpatine because it's such a powerful display of rage. At this point, Palpatine explains to him what happened in his own Sith lying way and begins torturing Vader with Force lightning, telling him he needs to use his lightsaber to defect it. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a lightsaber anymore, and Vader is warned that if he ever touches Palpatine with the Force again, that Palpatine will finish what Obi-Wan Kenobi did not. At this point, we see a lot of the anti-Jedi propaganda going on in the streets, with Grand Vizier Masa Meta leading a burning of lightsabers, just showing how the public has turned on the Jedi. Vader is sent on a mission to find a Jedi, to kill him, and to steal his crystal so he can make it bleed, creating his own red Sith lightsaber. At this point, Vader heads off to another world to retrieve a spaceship that Palpatine had left for him. He has to fight with some smugglers to get it and has some initial difficulties due to still adjusting his armor and becoming accustomed to it. Once he gets the ship, he goes to an outpost that's manned by clone troopers who'd previously fought in the Clone Wars but are now seemingly considered to be obsolete by the Emperor and his new regime. Vader infiltrates them, defeating everyone he needs to, hacking into the computer, and seeks someone who took the Barash vow, which is a form of penance Jedi took, cutting themselves off from literally everything but the Force, as he wants to find a surviving Jedi to fight. Searching Barash vow survivors, he finds a surviving Jedi who pretty much lived to fight one of the most powerful men in the Order, who'd long since cut himself off. Vader heads to the planet to do battle with this man, but encounters the usual complications and finds himself in a pretty heated duel. Eventually, he manages to tap into his inner Sith, threatening others around to serve as a distraction, getting the lightsaber that he needs, at which point he takes Palpatine's ordered trip to Mustafar, where there's a point strong on the dark side of the Force, and he tortures himself, making this crystal bleed, even seeing alternate futures of what could have been. Eventually, despite his initial complications, he manages to make the crystal bleed, returns to the Emperor, and ignites his red lightsaber. The next task he's given is to go to see to the old Jedi archives, in which Jocasta Nu served as librarian, and once he goes there, he encounters another man with a red lightsaber, and the two of them do battle. Palpatine later intervenes and introduces this man as the Grand Inquisitor, a former Temple Guard. The Inquisitors are a group of Force users and former Jedi Knights who turn to the dark side to save themselves to serve Palpatine and the Sith in hunting down other former Jedi survivors. This is the end of the first arc, and this story is not at all disappointing. It's a tremendous tale. Charles Soule definitely explains to fans through this story why he's one of the best writers of Star Wars comics today. One of the most cringeworthy moments of Revenge of the Sith was the infamous "No!" moment that we encountered at the end with Darth Vader rising from the operating table. Charles Soule actually manages to rewrite this scene and make it far more compelling and interesting, and writes into this the dialogue and the relationship between Palpatine and Vader, Vader coming to his new terms in life. It also introduces the concept of the Barash Vow, which has not been explored elsewhere in canon, but it does make for a way that we could have new potential surviving Jedi Knights out there in the galaxy. Seeing him embrace his inner Sith, doing what it takes to get the crystal, make it bleed, and return to Palpatine, and of course have his first encounter with an Inquisitor, definitely gives us some interesting backstory. A lot of us, of course, had watched Star Wars Rebels and were curious about where the Inquisitors came from, and especially in the next arc, we really get more of an explanation here. The second arc of this comic is entitled Legacy's End, which picks up where the previous one left off. This trade paperback, number 2 in the set, contains the next 6 issues, so it goes from issue 7 to issue 12. This time around, Darth Vader receives a rather interesting task from Emperor Palpatine. He's to find Jocasta Nu, the former Jedi librarian, but he's to have her captured alive because Palpatine wants to know the location of the Jedi and Sith artifacts that she has hidden. Jocasta Nu had actually fled Coruscant and was putting together a school of sorts on another world to potentially train future generations of Jedi Knights, and she has returned to Coruscant, and Vader ends up with his task having to go find her, and the two of them do battle inside the Jedi Temple. Vader at this point has also been training the Inquisitors, and needless to say, the man formerly known as Anakin Skywalker is a ruthless taskmaster, not afraid to chop off a few limbs and do what's necessary to get his point across. He ends up battling Jocasta, eventually subduing her and taking her into the custody of his legion of clone troopers. She is able to spoil that he was once Anakin Skywalker. The clone troopers overhear this, so of course Vader has to kill them to save face because he has to keep his secret. Jocasta eventually sacrifices herself, and while Vader was able to find the list of Force-sensitive children that she had, he actually destroys the list and does not tell Palpatine about it, performing one of the few selfless deeds that we actually see him following his fall to the dark side. At this point also, he's sent to another world where he's assaulted by bounty hunters, and he returns to Palpatine to ask whether or not Palpatine himself had ordered the execution attempt, which Palpatine denies, and he also explains that he doesn't want to rule over a galaxy of the dead, so Vader can't simply kill everyone he wants all the time with all his bundled rage. At this point, the two of them decide it's best to introduce Vader to the Empire, Palpatine stating that an order from Vader is as an order from him, and this is to be passed down to all his men. Vader executes the men that he has accused of participating in the assassination attempt and quickly gets his point across. This is a great continuation, and it's nice to see the character of Jocasta Nu return, who was pretty much only relegated to a single scene in Attack of the Clones and who didn't appear elsewhere in the canon for the most part. Seeing the battle between them and the return to the Jedi archives is definitely interesting. Apparently the Grand Inquisitor turned to the dark side for one reason being that Jocasta Nu wouldn't grant him access to her more hidden archives, including the dark side ones. This continues, and of course seeing Vader as the target of an execution goes about as well as you would expect. One of the bounty hunters, who's the child of a couple of bounty hunters, is Chaneth Cha, who would actually reappear in Charles Soule's later set Lando miniseries, which had come out a few years earlier. We also get a reference to Jocasta Nu's cache of Jedi goods that Luke Skywalker later uses for his school in the Rise of Kylo Ren miniseries. The third arc of the comic is entitled Burning Seas, and this contains the next 6 issues plus the annual that was put out as a part of this arc. This time around, Vader is given a task from Palpatine, hearing that King Li Char and the world of Mon Cala have resisted Imperial rule, and despite sending an emissary there, Li Char and the upper generals on Mon Cala have resisted Imperial rule. Vader takes the Inquisitors there to exact revenge and lay down the law, trying to get them to surrender to Imperial rule. However, Raddus and Akbar, two who would later become a part of the Rebel Alliance, wage war against the Imperials, doing what's necessary to try to keep their world safe. Li Char has actually been counseled by a former Jedi Knight and some Jedi disciples who were with him, and he ends up continuing to counsel Li Char, letting him know about visions that he's seen and everything, and it's not long before Vader and everyone get down there and do what's necessary. Li Char eventually finds out that this Jedi he's been taking counsel from is not all that he seems, and that these visions may not entirely be based on immediate fact. Eventually, one of the Inquisitors dies in all of the fracas, and Vader and Tarkin and the remainder of the Imperials do what's necessary to subjugate the world. Li Char surrenders, and the Jedi Knight counseling him is killed, although one of his disciples, Verla, actually manages to escape. Following these events, for Vader doing a favor to subjugate the king on behalf of Tarkin, he orders Tarkin to try to hunt him down and kill him on another world. And needless to say, this doesn't go too well for the Imperials that come with Tarkin. And when that's all said and done, there's also an annual here which sort of ties in with Rogue One, with Vader being sent on a task to hunt down those who have been sabotaging the Death Star attempts, and over time he starts to learn that the Death Star may even be a threat to his own impact on the galaxy on behalf of the Empire. This is a great arc, continuing the overall story of Charles Soule's Darth Vader comic, and it's interesting to see how Mon Calamari was eventually subjugated and fell under Imperial rule. There is an arc of the primary Star Wars comic set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, in which the Rebels return to try to break free the world of Mon Cala, and that was sort of a loose tie-in with this, even though they're set like a generation apart. The character of Verla would actually later resurface in the core Star Wars comic after it was relaunched between Empire and Jedi. There's some interesting developments here. Li Char was actually a character who'd previously appeared in the Clone Wars animated series, and as this story progresses, we definitely see, of course, Vader coming to terms with what he does, leading the Inquisitors in battle, although it's great to see the people of Mon Cala want to stand up to the Empire and do their part, which, of course, forces the Empire to take drastic measures in order to subjugate their world. Even Tarkin actually acknowledges Raddus's skill as a commander. But my favorite comic in this arc might be the one where Tarkin and his men are trying to hunt down and kill Darth Vader. It's just a very primal, dark issue, and it really starts to show us the sort of respect that Vader and Tarkin have for one another, which you could also consider a rivalry of sorts. The annual, admittedly, I wasn't as big of a fan of, because it makes Darth Vader almost seem a little too heroic, in that it seems like he's trying to sabotage the Death Star on his own, which somewhat undermines the attempts of the Rebels to try to steal the Death Star plans, and Vader lashing out at them, so it does send a bit of a mixed message. That's probably my least favorite issue in this entire arc. And the fourth and final arc of Charles Soule's Darth Vader Volume 2 comic is entitled Fortress Vader. This contains the last 7 issues of the comic. Darth Vader and the Inquisitors are sent to retrieve a Force-sensitive child, and at one point one of the Inquisitors hesitates, although she recants when she sees Vader and the other Inquisitors. Vader, of course, wields his lightsaber and chases this Inquisitor and the fellow Inquisitor she has a relationship of sorts with, doing his part to subdue him. The chaos that he caused across Coruscant, of course, earns him a berating from Emperor Palpatine, with Palpatine stating that a senator that he had plans for had been killed, and he has no desire to rule over a galaxy in which chaos looms, because then people will begin losing faith. He says that he'll be moving the Inquisitors off-world because of this, and he orders Vader to go deal with Bail Organa on Alderaan. Vader refuses because he states that he needs a world of his own, and Palpatine decides, based on what's going on, gifting him a world is the best idea. He also gifts him Padme Amidala's former starship. The world that Vader says he wants for himself is Mustafar, thanks to the dark side nexus that he'd previously explored when he had to make his lightsaber crystal bleed. Vader goes to Mustafar with Imperial architects, and of course, it's not long before they realize that Vader, of course, has very different tastes from what they would expect. Vader is being guided by the helmet of Lord Momin, an ancient Sith Lord that Palpatine had given him, and he begins using Momin's helmet to craft new designs for his fortress. Meanwhile, the natives on Mustafar want to lash out and deal with these people who are trying to build a fortress on their world. Momin eventually, after several failed designs, creates one that succeeds in concentrating the dark side nexus. However, Momin uses this to get a dark side body with lightsabers to try to battle Darth Vader so he can return into the galaxy and exact his own vision. Vader has some complications, though eventually he does manage to best Momin and cross through the gate himself. In this surreal atmosphere on the other side, he sees many visions of the past, alternate futures, and even a vision of his wife, although he's unable to bring her back to life through this. Eventually, he returns to the world of the living, communicating with Palpatine, stating that he will be returning, and states that he did find what he was looking for, even if that's somewhat contrary to the truth. This is a fantastic way to close out this comic. Of course, in Rogue One, we got our first glance at Vader's fortress on Mustafar, so it's interesting to see the story of how that came to be. The helmet of Lord Momin had previously appeared in Charles Soule's Lando comic, causing problems for Lando and his friends when they tried to steal the Emperor's former spaceship. So it's nice to see Momin as part of one of the things that Charles Soule has blended together in his various Star Wars comics, tying it all together. The story of how this fortress came to be, as well as how Vader does what's necessary to fight off the natives on Mustafar, it makes for some interesting highlights, which is certainly not unexpected, and this comic's ending does not disappoint in the least. Have you had a chance to read Star Wars Darth Vader Volume 2? What did you think if you've read it? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel for more content, and like this video if you found it helpful or interesting. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I will see you in my next Star Wars comic review.